So we currently have 31 people in the room right now, and I'm looking at the time. We have 6:02. I'll introduce myself if you haven't seen me, because no one's been on our campus. My name is Leroy Jackson. I'm the principal at Bertland Middle School, and welcome to one of our Parents Ed nights. This is a night that is particularly important to me because I have two children that are now in college. And boy, oh boy, I am happy to have been a part of this for the little segment that we've been doing it. It did help me, and more specifically, my daughter, who ended up going to San Luis Obispo and is working on an engineering degree in materials. So very exciting, had nothing to do with me, everything to do with her and her persistence, along with really good people. I have with us Nicole Kruger. She's our counselor. Welcome her on board. And she will pop in on occasion as we're hearing things because our presenter, Grant, is going to be presenting from a national level. He's worked with us a few times before. He'll remember when I interrupt because we have a couple local things that I sometimes throw out there. And Ms. Kruger will throw in as well. We also have Mrs. Bedrosian. She's online in the background, in the behind the scenes, watching and monitoring people. If you have comments and stuff like that, I think she'll be able to see them and she can bounce those out if we're able to make some Q&A. The Q&A, I believe we see it. I don't know how I set this up. So we ask that you don't put anything confidential in. If you have anything confidential, please call us later. And so with that, I welcome you, Grant, and I'll let you take it away.
Beautiful. Thank you, Leroy. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, everybody, for coming on this Tuesday? I think it's a Tuesday. Who knows anymore what day of the week it ever is. Like Leroy graciously introduced me, my name is Grant. I am a college counselor at Collegewise, which is an organization, we're a college admissions organization, and we do a variety of things in regards to college admissions. And today, I know the title says high school and college readiness, which is very broad, but I'm actually going to speak specifically to not only Bertland, but also Cal State's UCs, as well as private schools in general. I hope to kind of cast a wide net there, but I particularly want to talk about Cal State's and UCs. So that will be a good brunt of my talk today. Like Leroy said, there is a chat box as well. I can't see the YouTube chat box, but hopefully we can relay. I'm around for questions. I'll also give you my email at the end of this, as well as the introduction. If you ever have any questions, I've been in the admissions game too long for all of this knowledge to go to waste. Speaking of which, let's pop over into who I am. This is not the point of the conversation, but I think it's helpful to legitimize myself, not only for the sake of this presentation, but also for the sake of my ego. I began my career at my alma mater, Chapman University, just down the 22 over there in Orange, California. Spent about 5 years there as the assistant director of admissions. And then I went 3,000 miles down the 22. I think it ends eventually, but over into Richmond, Virginia, at the University of Richmond. Go Spiders. They're the only spider-based mascot in all of domestic American colleges, so it's very exciting. Riot Games is not a university. Riot Games is a tech organization, and I actually ran their internship program, took a little bit of a detour, and was the internship and recruitment manager for their university programs team. Missed higher education, though, and then came back into the education sector, worked for Pomona College, part of the Claremont Consortium, over there up the 57, 91, 110, I've lost myself. But over there with Scripps, Claremont McKenna, Pitzer, Pomona, and Harvey Mudd, those 5 beautiful liberal arts colleges over there in the Pomona area. I now work for Collegewise as a college counselor. I've been doing this for about 3 years now, and I'm on the other side of the desk helping students and families navigate the college admissions process. As a side gig, I also read files for UCSD to keep myself kind of in that world. I've read throughout my entire tenure, I've read almost 6 figures worth, not money-wise, I wish, but 6 figures numbers-wise of applications. So I have a lot of experience in that regard. So hopefully I can bring all of this in and give you a little bit, a 45-minute digestion of all of this, hopefully. So let's talk a little bit. The idea of this presentation is to give an overview of what college looks like, as well as what high school looks like, and what we should be focusing on in high school as we're looking into college. I obviously want to acknowledge that talking to 7th and 8th grade students and parents right now about college seems a little bit cart in front of the horse. And I want to acknowledge that right now. The goal of this presentation is not to stress parents and students out that if you're in 8th grade and haven't started thinking about college yet, that you're behind. Not at all the case. But like a good roadmap, I think we want to start thinking about some of these things as we're moving into high school and as we are navigating through those 4 years. Leroy?
Yeah, and just on that, and we've talked about this a little bit before. For the Torrance Unified School District, one of the things that we start talking about is math pathways, because math is sometimes a critical component of what we're going to be doing as we go through high school, and we're looking at the levels of rigor that we want the students to be in if they're looking for engineering or medical or something like that. So the reason we talk about that is because sometimes this math pathway conversation starts in, heck, believe it or not, 5th grade. As we go through this, I want to talk about the fact that we will have another night for parents when we'll talk about math pathways and opportunities for acceleration almost at every grade level. So no matter what math class you're in, there is that opportunity. But as you were saying, I think getting them familiar with A through G, talking about it early, it is not so. It's something you're familiar with when you're getting into when you're planning your high school schedule. And so as we start talking about these things and we think about that, it's kind of why we do this, is to get that mind going, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. One of my main goals in all of my work is to not stress people out as much as possible. So I want to always bring this with a level of ease. I bring this up, obviously, Bertlin can feed into a variety, but West, I believe, is the primary high school you're going into. This is not purely West's mission, but this is kind of the mission of high schools in general and things that we should be focusing on. High school for many students is a very formative time for themselves, for their aspirations, and it's where they can make a lot of connections, start to develop strengths, start to develop communication skills, both socially, academically, written, oral, and start to develop those confidence and social skills. Oftentimes when I'm talking to students about colleges in their late sophomore or junior year, or sometimes early senior year, I ask them, like, what did you like about high school? What sort of things do you want to carry over? Alternatively, what sort of things did you not like about high school? What sort of things do you kind of want to leave in high school as you're bringing that into college? And so high school is a really good arbiter for figuring out on a grand scale what we do and don't like. That's why I always recommend students to try things while they're in high school, clubs, activities, because I'd rather they do something and not like it than never know. Not liking something is a really good piece of information as we start to develop who we are, and logistically for me, what sort of aspects that they want to pursue or don't want to pursue in college. And so high school is a large time for many people, but in terms of the college atmosphere, that's why. Speaking of colleges, as we look past in a post-secondary life, there are lots of different options for students. There are over 3,000 colleges in the country alone, ranging from 20 students to 60,000 students. The ones you're going to be most familiar with are probably going to be ones in the Southern California or just California area, the UC and Cal States, as we will talk about. And those are all public schools. Those are 4-year public institutions. 4-year meaning that they will generally award students with a bachelor's degree. That's kind of what the surname for a 4-name institution is. A 2-year institution or a community college are usually institutions that will either feed into a 4-year and allow you to transfer in, or they'll award an associate's degree, which is usually a 2-year degree. And then trade schools. Trade schools are specifically schools, they don't always receive a degree, but they are trained specifically for certain crafts, certain trades. And so if a 4-year route or a 2-year route does not seem to be the way in which we are heading, trade schools are an amazing way to hop right into a craft or an apprenticeship and just start going without having to worry about general education requirements or 4-year coursework. Different strokes for different folks in all across these ways. In terms of the 4 years, there's 2 distinct pieces here. There's public schools like the UCs, like the Cal States. Out of state would be like ASU, Arizona State University, University of Arizona, University of Washington, University of Oregon. There's also a variety of private schools, and private schools can range in size, they can range in cost. Caltech, for example, is a private school. USC, sometimes mistakenly so, is viewed as public. It's actually a private school. It's one of the larger private schools in the country. LMU, Loyola Marymount University, just over here in Marina del Rey, also a private school. Private schools and public schools all award bachelor's degrees. They all have a variety of programs. And so there's not usually a program that is unique to a public or private school. However, public schools generally will cost less because they are subsidized by state institutions and by state grants. Not necessarily going to get too deep into cost, but as a general rule, public schools will more often than not be cheaper, but there are a variety of ways to make private schools cheaper, but I don't want to get too deep into a rabbit hole there. Let's hop over into the UC campuses. So the UC, the University of California, UCs for short, there are 9 different campuses across SoCal and NorCal. As you can see all of them here, I don't want to go through all of them, but they're all going to be research institutions. UCs in general were created originally to be research institutions. And I don't want to get too deep into here in terms of the difference between Cal States and UCs, but as a broad stroke, a research institution are institutions that will usually have less, I don't want to say practical, but practical is the phrase they use. A practical degree would be something maybe along the lines of like business would be a practical application. Engineering would be a practical application. These schools have engineering, but UC schools will also have programs like economics, philosophy, truly higher education types of subjects, whereas Cal State institutions will oftentimes have programs that are direct into a program or direct into a trade. Like business schools were generally used to be primarily a Cal State application, a Cal State University type of subject. Now many UCs, because business schools are very popular now and a very popular major, UCs have started to adopt business majors, but primarily they used to only have economics, or they had broader degrees that would focus on research, whereas Cal State's a lot more practical programs. The UCs though, spread all across the board. You can apply to one of them, or you can apply to all 9. It's all the same application. And then the Cal States, there are a variety of different Cal State applications. It is a very regional based system. Obviously, you don't necessarily need to be regional to apply to any of the Cal States, but they likely service a majority of regional applications in Cal States. Fantastic institutions. California, we are very lucky to have one of the best, if not the best, public school educational system in the entire country, debatably the world. UCs and Cal States are really the bellwether for a lot of what other institutions do and how they gauge students and how they educate students. So the UCs and Cal States have a rich history of education. So we're pretty fortunate to have these systems within our beautiful, wonderful state. Beautiful. So we can talk more about that. We'll go more into A through G and what it looks like to get into those schools. Let's talk a bit about a 4-year plan in high school. Now, these are all very broad, and a lot of these things we don't necessarily need to focus on specifically until we start looking at colleges. But overall for high school, and I hate to be this broad, but what colleges are looking for in general is always going to be within context, not only context of the school, but also context of the students. And so challenging courses, oftentimes when I say that, it brings up the idea of all APs or IBs or all honors, and if they don't take those, then it's not challenging. And it's not necessarily the case. When I say take balanced and challenging classes, that's going to be specifically to the student. And oftentimes when you're getting into freshman, sophomore year, you're going to want to get an idea of where your strengths are, where are areas where maybe we can focus more of our efforts and strengths into, and what are areas of core subjects that maybe want to take more of a moderate approach to, because it's just not a field that I feel very comfortable in. You do not need to take all honors or all AP or all challenging courses to get into college. One of the slides I'm going to talk about here in a second is this idea that I think lots of parents and students are worried that college is more difficult to get into than it ever has been. And for some institutions, it is very competitive. But as you'll see, I don't want to bury the lead here, but college has never been easier to get into than it has now. And that's pretty much always the case every single year, just with the advent of more schools, more programs, more resources, more technology. And so higher education is very, very accessible. You just kind of need to know what you're looking for. And so high school, in addition to developing your own strengths, is also a way of figuring out how can we balance work? How can we know when we need to take on more work, or when do we know that we need to take a step back, that maybe we are overwhelming ourselves right now? And it's always a give and take there. College is not necessarily looking for immaculate records. Trends are definitely a natural part of the high school process. Obviously, meet with your college counselor, meet with your guidance counselor. Oftentimes what I will help students oftentimes do in addition with their college counselor is to help them plan out a 4-year plan of what courses they're taking. And Leroy was mentioning that earlier with a math pathway. There's also English pathways, foreign language pathways, figuring out what sort of classes we might want to be taking freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, senior year. If we don't end up taking those in junior and senior year, that's fine. But the idea of planning is really indispensable. That old idea of plans are useless, but planning is extremely valuable. Same thing here. If we were to take, Algebra 1 our freshman year, where can we expect to see ourselves junior, senior year, taking that to its natural progression and conclusion? And that way you can kind of see what your 4 years look like. And then as we are getting into, I would say, junior and probably junior year, we want to probably start looking at certain schools and colleges around the area that we're interested in and get an idea of what classes are required for these schools. Luckily for California, the A through G requirements, which I'll talk about here in a sec, like I said, is kind of the bellwether for all schools across the country. Very, very few schools require a more competitive or more rigorous baseline of courses to be eligible for admission into the school. So A through G requirements that I'll talk about here in a second they rippled through most of the country. So very rarely will you find a school that if you did A through G, you're not going to be eligible to apply into those. But with college admissions, the answer I always say with any question is always, it depends. So as we're going in, we want to always think about that. But let's talk a little bit about A through G requirements. So this is A through G. One slide, very simple, theoretically. Let's dive a little bit into it in terms of how this approaches. Now, granted, most high schools are designed around A through G certification. High school graduation requirements and A through G certification, though, are not always the same. Generally, high school graduation requirements in terms of the courses you need to take and the grades you need to receive are generally a little bit more relaxed than the A through G requirements. So no going into that we're not necessarily just shooting for high school graduation requirements. But if we are looking to be competitive at UCs at the very least in Cal States, as well as other institutions, A through G is gonna kind of be the golden ideal here. So 2 courses of history and social science. A course is basically a year-long coursework in there. So fall semester and spring semester would all coalesce into one course. English, they want you to take English for all 4 years here. Now, granted, some students may also take courses over the summer if they want to do an English course over the summer and free up some time in their next year or previous year. They can absolutely do that as long as they're taking it where it's accredited through the school and the school accepts it. Most high schools will have a agreement with different organizations that they can take and then transfer those schools back, or those credits back. And I'll often have students oftentimes, if there's a course that they either want to get out of the way or they want to dive deeper into, or they just want to focus on purely over the summer and not have to have the riffraff of other subjects happening, they can focus on that over summer as well. It's oftentimes at an increased cost, so be aware of that. But it's not necessarily 4 years, it's just 4 courses. But with English, most students will take it freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior year, and that's required. At least 4 courses are. Mathematics, this one's the most interesting, and it's usually the one that is the most nuanced. So for A through G requirements, you only need 3 courses of mathematics, but they have to be up to Algebra 2. So Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, they need Algebra 2 for that. Leroy?
Well, and this is where I always kind of like have a meltdown and I go, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? And one of the things with these A through Gs is that we are talking about the whole state of California. Frequently, some of these things are also taking into consideration other states. And I have had calls in the past, and it was about 8-9 years ago, where we had a middle school student who was taking geometry as an 8th grader, And we had a school from a different state call us and ask us what sort of high school we were in, and how is it possible for this child taking geometry, because geometry was one of the things, was one of the higher classes that they had in the high school. They were actually kind of puzzled what to do. So what illuminated to me that some schools do not necessarily have the number of engineers or the quality of education that we do here in California. So when you talk about this, on the mathematics, Algebra 2, being what they're looking for, many of our students are going to exceed that. And so that's why the math pathways, I think sometimes people freak out. And yet I think when they're looking at Algebra 2 and possibly an AP calculus or something like that, if you wanted to. It's not necessary, but I just wanted to point that out, that the A through G is very doable. And the fact that we don't have more students as a community, we should have 99% kids doing this A through G. So I just wanted to bounce in on that. I think the vast majority of kids are going in a good direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Algebra 2 is a relatively manageable baseline, especially if we're looking into higher education. And the reason they do that is because most colleges are going to have a math requirement in order to graduate from the college, which is usually going to be a statistics or a calculus course. And so they want to make sure that if you complete Algebra 2 in high school, you're more than likely going to be able to complete this level in college. That's kind of why they do these things, to make sure that you're prepared. But Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, and then it generally goes pre-calc, and then from pre-calc, it can go into trigonometry, statistics, calculus, different pathways there. Lab science. So lab science, these would be something along the lines of biology, chemistry, physics, in some capacities, environmental science, in some capacities, psychology, but usually not. Ultimately, it depends, and I'll give you a resource right after this that kind of breaks down the UCs. Even though they are particular, they have broken down every single course that every single California high school offers, and they've categorized it into each of these A through G. And the reason they're called A through G is exactly for these reasons on the left-hand side: A, history; B, English; C, mathematics. They've categorized each of these into these different sections. But most students will take biology and chemistry. If they have more interest in different areas, they can definitely do that. The reason this one says 3 recommended is if you are going into a STEM-based major, STEM meaning science, technology, engineering, math, anything in that realm, they're going to probably want to recommend you taking a 3rd year of science in some capacity or another, whether that's AP, whether that's, not necessarily AP computer science, but computer science, physics. There's a whole laundry list of different sciences they offer. And if you are going to go into science, you can't really dodge those in college. So you probably want to be taking those in high school, because if you don't want to take it in high school, more than likely, you're not going to enjoy college taking, a semester worth of lab science for 8 semesters straight. Foreign language. So language other than English, LOTE, as it's called oftentimes. This is any foreign language requirements. For the most part, any foreign language will count here as long as you are getting up to similar to Algebra 1, Algebra 2. What they're asking for here is not 2 years of foreign language, but up to Spanish 2, French 2, German 2, Japanese 2. So they want you to be at the 2nd year worth of foreign language there. Leroy?
But I love it because I can just pop in and you see me. So there's no secret. I can't make a jump. On the foreign language, this is one of the ones, and I want to make certain, I actually learned this years ago when we first worked on these A through G. This is an unusual one because many of the other ones actually kind of look for 4 years, all this. The foreign language is the one that is looking really at the level. Mm-hmm. And so let's say you actually, for reasons we can't explain because you were somewhere else, you had a high school level 4, but you only did it for 1 year. That would work. It's really the level. You want to be a 2nd year or course 2 or higher is really what they're looking for. So we actually have a 7th grade Spanish class that we teach here at Bertland. It doesn't get high school credit, but as an 8th grader, you get into Spanish 2 at the high school. And so technically, as an 8th grader, you kind of completed that course requirement, although you probably want to go on for 3 so you have it on the transcript, and it's much better to have 3 than 2, right?
Generally, yeah. Generally, the more classes, the more you can take, the better, as long as you're balancing. The idea of taking challenging courses plus balanced, but like Leroy said, it's the course level they're more interested in. Nicole?
Yes, and to piggyback on that, I think the important word what you said, Grant, was balancing. Parents don't feel like you should have 3 or 4 years of the same language. Just make sure you have the balance, because I don't want the kids to be stressed out. You can get into any college without, honors classes or AP classes. So just make sure you have that good balance.
Yes, always. That is always something to repeat and keep on a mantle above your bed and fireplace. Balance is the most important piece with this, especially in high school and life in general, but especially as we're talking about this. Visual and performing arts, just 1 year of this. If you want to take more, absolutely, please do it. Arts is the spice of life, but they're looking for anything in here: pottery, theater, dance, drawing, anything in this realm. As long as you have 1 course, you're fine. And then G is a very interesting one. So G is college preparatory elective. And this one is a catch-all. So there are courses that are specifically G related, whether that be in some courses it's computer science, in some places it's psychology, in some places it's any variety of more high school specific courses. That high school, like West High School, has some unique courses that only fit into G. G, however, is also satisfied if you have completed the maximums for each of these. So if you take 3 years of social science, then that 3rd year of social science will drip into the G college preparatory elective. So it's rarer that students are A through G qualified and then don't fulfill G. The common issues with an A through G are usually going to be sometimes mathematics, but oftentimes, usually it's language other than English, and then visual and performing arts. I have a lot of students that just, for some reason or another, they're very competitive, they're very strong, but they just forget to take a theater class or they forget to take a pottery class. So make sure you're, not only for college, but also for your soul, you're taking some sort of arts class while in college or while in high school and college and life. That's one of the more usual suspect of people that, at least with students I work with, where students forget to take an F and they need to take a summer course. Okay, beautiful. For these courses, and this is also where it gets different than high school requirements. Oftentimes high school requirements, they might allow a D+. A D+ might get you credits and it will get you credit on your transcript. However, for UCs and Cal States, it's a C- or better. I believe just a C, but it depends on the school. Generally a C- is fine, because some schools do and don't, plus or minus, but I would say a C or better in all your A through G courses. So if you do receive a D, that doesn't count. There's a whole lot of, there's also a small thing that we do not need to get into, where if you get a D one semester and a C second semester, it can count over that C. But if you're getting a D in general, UCs might be harder to get into. Cal State's potentially a variety of them, but we want to shoot for Cs or better in most of these courses. Even if your high school is giving you credit for a D, it doesn't mean the UCs will. That's one of the more important things that oftentimes gets overlooked, because we'll have students who come to us and say, I got a D and my school gave me credit. I got 3 units for that, but the UCs will give you a goose egg on those. So you're going to want to retake those if we want to be A through G certified. How they weight. So you can actually go, there's a variety of tools available where if you Google UC GPA calculator, they're very transparent with how they calculate your GPA. They give certain grade point averages, extras for students enrolled in certified APs, honors, if a school has international baccalaureate, or any transferable college courses. So if you do a running start, or if you take a college course at El Camino, those are weighted heavier than a general course. Same thing as AP, honors, IB. So what you would likely want to be doing, once again, like Nicole said, like Leroy said, like I've been saying, is find that balance. If you are strong in a subject area and you want to bite off a little bit more, an honors course, an AP course, a community college course can be a great venture into that. But the worst thing we can do is overload ourselves and go in and then bite off more than we can chew. And so a lot of that is really finding your balance. And on that note, they weight 10 through 11 weighted. So weighted means that they're giving those extra grade points for those honors courses. They don't include your 9th grade. They will see it, but they don't include it in the GPA that they use for evaluation. There's a variety of reasons for that, but one of the primary ones is freshman year can be tough for a variety of people. It's also a great year to start exploring and kind of getting a foothold in high school and figuring out what subjects, now that we're at a high school level, what subjects are we more comfortable in? What subjects did we dive into and we're like, oh, I do not like this. And so by 10th grade, they're hoping that we can get a better feel for that. We can start to find that balance. I'm not saying that from 10th grade onwards, you need to be perfect or anywhere near, but 9th grade, for at least for UCs and Cal States, can be a year of discovery and exploration in terms of those courses. Leroy?
So one of the things I think we've been talking about for years, and this goes back in time, is that middle schools aren't a quarter system. So every quarter students restart with like a new A, until their first test. And when you get to the high school, they move over to the semester. And that's one of the tough transitions for freshmen, is that first year when they think, oh, quarter one, it didn't do so well, but that's okay. I'm going to start over with an A because it's a new quarter. And they go, no. It's a semester. You still have that one. And so I appreciate the conversation with that, because the transition into 9th grade year sometimes has a lot of things that change. And so it's good that the universities don't look at it hard or heavy, and they really focus more on that 10th and 11th grade year. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Of course. Now, granted, this is only for Cal States and UCs. A lot of private schools and other out-of-state public schools may consider 9th grade, but generally 10th and 11th are a lot more indicative of your success, of your readiness and success in college than your 9th grade is. So we'd rather you have a more balanced 10th, 11th grade and have your 9th grade be a year where you can start to dip your toes into some waters, even waters that you might get your toe right out of. So that's how they do that. This resource is fantastic. If you type in A through G course list into Google, you'll find this really easily. Also a link right there. I can send this PowerPoint or just give you this link as well. This is public. This is a thing that the UCs put out. And if you search for your school, it has an index of every single school in the state of California, all the courses they offer, and how they view them. Not only if it's an A through G, like if it's an A through G, which A or B or C or G is it, but also if they give extra honor points for that. So this is a little weird, some courses are called honors, honors math, but UC will go through and evaluate, is this actually an honors course? Even though it's called honors, doesn't always mean that. 9 out of 10 times it does, but sometimes you can be surprised that a geometry honors course isn't actually given extra honors points on an A through G. So because the UCs are the most applied to school system in the entire country, they have to systematize a lot of these things. So you can use that to start planning out your year, as well as what courses the school offers. Your guidance counselor at your high school is going to be a better resource for that because they are very nuanced in terms of that. But this is a really great tool for finding out what courses the high school offers and how the UCs view each of these schools or each of these courses within that school. So you go in here, type in West High School, type in South, type in anything along those lines, and you'll find it. Let's transfer a little bit over into the private side. So like I said, it's pretty fortunate that we have the UCs in our backyard because the A through G requirement really ripples through most private schools' requirements. Private schools, like I said, generally smaller than public schools, but not always the case. USC is larger than a huge number of public schools, and it's a private school. But Occidental College, LMU, Caltech, those are a lot more emblematic of private schools. Usually smaller schools, sometimes smaller class sizes, sometimes more nuanced programs. There's a whole variety of reasons and a whole variety of specialties that private schools have. But they're a great option, and there's a whole variety in California and across the country. The one difference with private schools is that their tuition is going to be the same regardless of in-state versus out-of-state. For public schools, like the UCs, like Cal States, like ASU, you will get a discount if you are a resident of the state that you are applying into. So if you're an Arizona resident and you apply to ASU and you're accepted, you will generally pay a lower tuition. Same thing with Cal States, same thing with UCs. A UC tuition for out-of-state students is comparable to a private school education oftentimes. And so there is that give and take with public and private schools. But in terms of requirements for private schools, 9 out of 10 times, they're the exact same. History, math, science, foreign language. The one thing that's usually different here is that some private schools will either require or heavily recommend a third year of a foreign language. And by third year, I mean Spanish 3, French 3, German 3, ASL 3. So they'll require that or heavily recommend that. So be on the lookout for that. And similarly, GPA, different for every single school. Every single school has carte blanche to calculate the GPA how they want. And so that's why GPA isn't always a really good metric for how well you're doing on a nationwide scale, because so many different GPA scales and weighted and unweighted and inflated and deflated. And so when schools are reviewing applications, even UCs and Cal States, very large institutions, they'll gauge it not only based on the school that you're applying from, the high school you're applying from, but also, the courses you've taken, your trend, your personal situation. So it's not just a number. So if a student comes to me and says, I have a 3.9, can I get into UCSD? Can I get into Chapman? I have no idea. That number means almost nothing to me. And so everything is very contextually based. Probably should have come earlier into here, but APs and honors are always something that you'll want to kind of chew on if that's the pathway we want to go down. Like I said, discovering these courses and leaning into these courses is very much a trial and error situation for some students. If they feel they're coasting in a regular level course of a certain subject, and they feel confident in being able to take the next step into an honors or maybe even an AP, always a good thing to explore and figure out if that's the way we want to go. But we don't want to go from like all regular into all AP because we feel like we're ready. I've been told I need to have all APs to get into college. Not the case, not true. And you're probably doing yourself more harm if you're jumping from the shallow end all the way into a less shallow end. However, if you do want to go into APs and you're exploring these, you want to, first of all, figure out, are there requirements of getting in? Do certain high schools have a cap on how many students can go into certain AP courses? Do I need to take a certain course before going into this? So if I want to take AP biology, do I need to take a regular biology before I go into that? Or can I just apply into this? So every single high school is different for that. But if you do have an AP class on the mind, it is helpful as you're doing your 4-year plan to start to think about what are the building blocks that can allow me to not only feel prepared, like emotionally for this course, but also logistically, making sure that the high school will allow you to be in and you have the appropriate prerequisites. And you don't need to take AP classes across the board, especially if you are a student that does better in one A through G over another. You can definitely just take certain sectors of AP or honors courses. So keep your strengths in mind, keep your interests in mind as you're going through this. But APs and honors are evaluated across the board, and most colleges will give students a little bit of a GPA bump for APs and honors courses to make up for the difficulty and rigor of those courses across the board. Activities. This is kind of the Bermuda Triangle of the college admission side. We can quantify grades. We can quantify a lot of different things in the admissions process. It is difficult to quantify or formulatize activities. In schools that care about activities are usually going to be pretty nuanced. Like UCs definitely do care about activities. Private schools in general will care about your activities because they are really focused on building a community and building a student body that gives back, that invests in the people around them, and that can build an enjoyable community for themselves. And the best indication of whether or not a student will do that is if they did that in high school. And so similarly to the AP and honors conversation, colleges aren't looking for you to be involved in everything, to have a laundry list of every single activity and have a resume like 3 pages long. It's always going to be quality over quantity with this. I can tell you from reading from mildly selective to extremely selective schools that what really will set students apart is not how much they've done, but what do they actually care about here? And the kind of story, not the story I tell, but the example I give here is that colleges look for students involved in activities because they want you to be involved in college. Students who are involved in college are happier, they graduate on time, they generally will encourage other people to apply and give back to the institutions. So people who are heavily involved in the community at their college is just better for everybody. It's better for the student, better for the school, better for everyone. And the best metric for that is how are you doing in high school? And so what they're most interested in is what's going to pass through the net of high school to college. Lots of things get caught in this net. Sometimes community service gets caught in this net. Sometimes volleyball gets caught in this net. metaphor as for that. What's really persuasive for them is, what are you going to bring onto campus? What's so important to you that you're not just doing it to get into college, but you're doing it because it's actually something very viscerally enjoyable to you, something that you really like and that you would do regardless or not you were being judged for it. Those are the things that are really, really strong, and can really set yourself apart from different applications. And it's the quality of that thing that's the most important thing. Now, if you do a sport and you're not trying to get into a D3 or D2 school, it doesn't mean that a sport was a waste of time in high school. It's still an amazing way to showcase that even though I might not play football or soccer in college, I'm still going to be really interested in pursuing those kind of activities and being involved in those things in college. Leroy?
So, yeah, sorry. We're starting something this year. We're in the very beginning stages of it, and I didn't believe this to be real. But esports is apparently this is apparently.
I work for a video game company, so I'm very familiar with this.
Oh, okay. And it turns out that there are small grants for people who play esports. UCI, Berkeley, several universities actually have. This is actually something that's real. I didn't believe it. And so, it's an interesting thing. It's a little bit more than a hobby, but there's a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah. I have a PS5 right behind me, so
we'll have to play sometime. We'll have to play.
Yeah, and once again, and video games used to be a really good example of that, where there's different ways to be involved in a community. You can play video games by yourself and not be involved in the community, or esports is a really good example of a way to take something that you enjoy and building a community around it. That's what's really important here, is not just how good I am at a video game, but how can I take my interests and enhance, add to, or build a community around these sort of aspects and ideas. That's what activities are. Now, granted, some students don't have the luxury of being able to be involved in activities. They have family responsibilities, they have jobs, they have a whole variety of pieces, and those things are equally as weighted in the application process. And so if you don't have the luxury of having that free time, that's absolutely okay. Colleges are very understanding of that, as long as you are in your application explaining that. I think some students oftentimes feel a little bit reserved about those things. Colleges want to know more. I'm getting too deep into this. Most importantly here, find what you like, take those times, explore things that you do and don't like, and find the things that you really want to make the most out of your high school experience. Those are the things that really resonate. Balance. I mentioned this, Nicole's mentioned this, Leroy's mentioned this. It's always really important. We don't want to overload people in high school. High school is a time to challenge yourself, explore, but also have fun, study, sleep, and find that balance. That's going to be the theme of tonight. I know we're cutting into 10 minutes here. I want to talk a little bit about testing, because testing is a very nuanced thing now. It used to be very easy. Take the SAT, take the ACT. You have to. I'm sorry, you have to. It's a little bit different now, and I'll share these slides afterwards so you can get a better idea. But now it's more of a question of, is testing right for you? UCs and Cal States, for example, are test-free. Even if you get a perfect score, they're not going to evaluate it. They have no mechanism by which to see it. But a variety of schools are either test-free, test optional, or some schools are still test required. Georgetown, for example, is a school that comes to mind. So what I generally recommend students doing is still taking the PSAT, pre-ACT diagnostic. Nicole?
Just to clarify, because it took me a second to realize what you said, parents, know that he doesn't mean the tests are free of cost. It just means they don't need the test to get into the school. Correct, Grant?
Correct. Yeah. Test free. Yeah.
They don't need that to get in.
Correct. There's another phrase for it, which generally the higher education test blind is more of an ableist term. So we use test free instead. So test free is what most higher education professionals will utilize. So test free means they do not look at tests. Yes, really good clarification there, Nicole. So here's a pretty good workflow for testing. In general, even if you are certain that you do not want to take a test, I would still recommend taking a practice test. These are free, meaning don't generally cost money. The PSAT, the pre-ACT, or any institution, Collegewise included, Compass, Revolution, any variety will offer free diagnostics. And these will give you a really good baseline of what's our baseline of a test score for an SAT or an ACT. Once we have that, we want to evaluate not only how did that test feel, like was it horrific, is it stressing us out, is it way too much to even do again? And then once we get your score back, you can start to take that score and look at certain schools you're interested in. If the school requires testing and you want to go, like if Georgetown is your top school, I'm so sorry, you're gonna have to test regardless. However, most schools are test optional. Test optional means that if you have a score and you want to submit it, you can, and they'll evaluate it. However, if you don't have a test score, you do not need to submit it, and they're not going to hold it against you. Nicole?
Sorry.
You're fine.
As someone asked, what is the right time to get tested? Like which grade?
Great question. I'll pop into that into the next slide, but that's a really good question. Generally, the PSAT and the pre-ACT will happen in generally junior year. Sometimes they'll have a 10th grade year. I usually recommend, if we're really gung-ho and we're shooting for more selective schools, sometimes late 10th grade or early 11th grade is a good idea. And if we're just kind of shooting for any variety of schools, 11th grade is probably the sweet spot there. But I'll go into that here in a little bit. If the school is test free, you don't necessarily need to test. So if you're only applying to Cal States and UCs, there's no reason for you to test because they're not going to look at it. But if you want to have if you're applying to any private schools, almost all private schools will have some variety of test optional pieces. And the reason I want students to take a practice test first, ideally, is just to get a bearing. Like they may really hate testing, they may not like it, but maybe through some, all the planets align, they do well on the SAT or ACT. And regardless, a good test score, even though it's not required, can still be a compelling piece. If the school is test optional and you have a test score from a diagnostic or a free test, you can get an idea of like, where does my score fall into these averages? The middle 50% is usually what schools will give. Now, granted, your first diagnostic, you want to have the student go in cold and you don't want to worry about prep. However, the score you get can likely be improved upon. It depends on how much, sometimes a few hundred, sometimes not for SAT. For ACT, sometimes a few points up and down. You're likely not going to go from, a 1200 to a 1600. Not generally. It's happened, but it's rarer. So you can kind of wiggle room there as you're going into it. But I have a lot of students this year who took the practice SAT, who took a diagnostic, and they did fine, but it's just not something they want to dedicate their energy to. And we had to look at their schools, which schools are required, which schools are test optional. No schools required them, and their scores would take too much of a test prep scenario for them to get a score that's going to be competitive. And so for those students, testing's just not in the cards for them. And that's absolutely fine. However, know that with testing, things change every year, especially nowadays. So as you're going into sophomore year, start to look. I also present at West High School, and hopefully I'll still be presenting in 2-3 years from now. 2025 grant might come back and say, testing came back with a force, something came around and College Board, so now testing you have to do. So this is the landscape of testing right now. So I would say come sophomore year, start to look at the testing landscape again. I imagine test optional is not going to go anywhere anytime soon. if at all, especially with the UCs going test free. But if I could predict the future, I would be magic, and I'm not magic just quite yet. Testing, like I said, is generally done in the spring of 11th grade. That's going to be the lion's share of people who will take their first actual SAT. They'll usually take a PSAT in the fall of 11th grade. But generally the first test is done the spring of 11th grade. So the summer before 12th grade, or the term before the summer. That's very confusing. Spring, 11th grade, you're fine. Colleges don't care, SAT over ACT, they do not care. Whichever one you do better on, they are super fine with. And although most schools are test optional at this juncture right here, a good score is still a good score. Not submitting a score, I get this question a lot. If I don't submit a score, will they assume I tested poorly? No, not necessarily. However, a good test score is still a good test score, but they're not going to evaluate you for the absence of a test score, only if the test score is in there. It's very nuanced. It's kind of hard to explain in a way that makes everyone feel really good about being test optional. But I promise you, having been in many committee rooms for schools that were test optional before it was cool, schools that have test optional policy have a lot of due diligence to make sure that they are not evaluating students who don't submit test scores and not having any bias against those students. So I promise you that's the case. I've already gone into these a little bit, but as I said before, a lot of the schools that get all of the attention are the schools that are highly selective. You know, some of the UCs, for example, Stanford, the bumper sticker schools, as we call them. Those are the ones that New York Times comes out, or LA Times comes out and says, most competitive year of all time for Stanford students, 1% are admitted. That's not true. In the future, it may be. Those get all of the news sites going crazy, and those are oftentimes what is portrayed. However, like I said earlier, with the advent of technology and resources and everything, college has never been more accessible than it is right now. The majority of four-year colleges will accept at least half of their applicants, and some will accept 30 to 40%, which is considered very selective. And then a small sliver accept less than 20%, but those ones get like 95% of the attention from outlets and such. So know going into this that it's never been easier to get into college than it is now, and that will likely be even still true in 2025, 2026. This is getting a little bit too deep here, but there are certain majors, if your students are thinking about it, that oftentimes you apply directly into those majors. So as we're going into junior year and into senior year, if we have any interest in these courseworks, we might want to start looking at specific courses that we need to take in high school that are going to be required or heavily recommended. Like, for example, nursing and engineering or computer science, they're probably going to want you to have that third year of lab science for those. For nursing, for most direct nursing programs, you're going to want to have physics, biology, and chemistry across the board. Film arts, you apply into those, you might need a portfolio, some business programs. So these majors will usually have additional requirements. So just be aware of those. You don't need to plan those starting in freshman year, but going into junior year is probably when we want to start looking at, like, are we applying into any boutique programs like these? And if so, do we need to make sure that you have physics on your course load senior year? Do you need to start making a portfolio of your filmic or your drawing arts, or do you need to have a portfolio for architecture, so on and so forth? Just something to file away. This book's fantastic. It's a book I try to read every single year, especially as I'm working at different schools, because it's a really good way to calm down a lot of the admissions mania. And it says an antidote to college admissions mania. This book not only goes into, I didn't write this book. I never met Frank Bruni. I don't know him. It's just really good. And I gotta proselytize for books that calm people down with admissions. because this book talks about a lot of people will attest their value, and I see it a lot, especially right now with my seniors. They attest a lot of their value as to whether or not a faceless group of admissions people admitted them into a school based on, 9 pages of a black and white application. It's not real. And there are things that you can't control in life, and where you go is not who you're going to be. It's not your worth. It's not your value. It's none of that. And so this not only gives a lot of emotional advice, but also data that showcases that for a majority of people, it doesn't, not even majority, a super majority of people, it doesn't really matter where you go. There's not a great deal of data that showcases that people who go to XYZ university do better than other people when you account for any variety of things. So if you ever feel overwhelmed, this book is great. There's a lot of great literature about college admissions work. This one's primarily a more emotional piece, and it really helps to contextualize this whole journey. So recommend. Here's Julia Roberts doing math. I'm available for questions. I'm already 2 minutes over, so I apologize, but I'll let Leroy and Nicole take over from here. Here is my name, my email, phone number as well. Thank you all so much for having me, for inviting me into your computers on Tuesday nights. And I'll let Leroy and Nicole take over. Thank you.
I thank you so very much. And I think Ms. Kruger earlier this evening mentioned the fact that, anybody that's interested in having some additional conversations or questions can easily email her, and we can send it your way, or they can email you directly as you posted your email there. And we will have the high school, we'll be doing a parent night specifically about for 9th graders or 8th graders going into 9th grade. We'll have that. So we have a couple of more things that are planned, and we do value questions. I have the list of people I think who are on with us via the Zoom, and I'll send out a link so that if they have any questions, they can answer it. And we might invite you back if we see something that's like, oh wow, this would be a good 20-minute little chat if you can. So we truly appreciate you being here. We appreciate everybody. Nicole, do you have anything to say?
No, you pretty much covered it all. So just reach out to us if you have additional questions. This slideshow will be sent to you.
And again, Grant, I really thank you for the last slide. I think both Nicole and I, we're going to get shirts that say that. It really speaks volumes. So again, thank you all. There you go. You are not, where you go is not who you'll be. Cannot emphasize that enough. Watching children get into the colleges and all that stuff was very exciting for my daughter and her friends. Anyhow, so with that, we're going to cut this off. We thank you all for being here, and we're going to end this now. Thank you, thank you, thank you.